Magnetic Monopole Part 1 of 4 parts, Ra'uruhu. One of the very interesting core aspects and most extraordinary mysteries of human design is the magnetic monopole. It's been very fortunate that, in terms of the information of the revelation, that so much of this information has been verified at some level or another. The verification of the neutrino with mass and the magnetic monopole leads to an ability for us to be able to mechanically have a reliable way to look at the way in which we operate and the way in which the world operates. Notice that the mandala is a calendar, yeah? It's a study of time. So just to put physics into a very simple binary, we basically have a dualistic concept now of what is called the universe, what we refer to in human design as the biverse. There is this dualism between what we call relativity, which is a way of understanding the dimensionality of the world put forward by Einstein, and on the other side, quantum. We have two very different ways in which we can see and verify through those different ways the universe that we look at. In other words, quantum within quantum can be verified, and relativity within relativity can be verified. But there is, as yet, no bridge between these two domains, no bridge between the relativistic view of the universe and the quantum view. This is the holy grail of higher physics, to find some kind of unified principle. Unified field theory is one of the names it goes under, in which one can integrate these two aspects. In many ways, it goes back to the very beginning of the universe itself with the Big Bang. We know that what emerged from singularity was a basic binary, a binary in particle physics that we can reduce to leptons and quarks. And ultimately, as we come down the line, we get to this point in the development of our intellectual capacity that we are actually in the same place, just in the larger dimension of that duality. We do have these two different ways in which dimensionally, the totality functions. The thing that holds it all together is the mystery. What is the unifying force? What is it that brings all this together? For me, it's clear that this is the magnetic monopole. Let's look at this in a microcosmic sense. We're going to look at the way in which the magnetic monopole holds together the illusion of our lives. And not only the illusion of our lives, but in holding us together literally, creates the construct that we work with, the dynamics of the human design mandala wheel, and everything that is associated with it. The magnetic monopole is really a key element in understanding any understanding of human design, or any understanding of the physics beyond that. To begin with, this is a very, very old illustration. This glyph of the magnetic monopole is one of the first that was drawn. I don't pretend to completely understand this drawing, but what I do understand is the 8 that is inherent in it. And what is so interesting from that perspective is this profound relationship that exists between the magnetic monopole and what we in human design call the G center, or what we reference to as the potential of consistent or inconsistent identity. We can also see two other elements that are here in this illustration. This is an illustration of the design crystal and the personality crystal. It is these three elements that are the essence of how life is, in a way, projected, how it's literally put out literally into the world. There is a very profound relationship that exists between the design crystal and the monopole. In human design, we give the monopole the label or keynote of the driver, and the design crystal is the vehicle. So here we have the driver and the vehicle together. When you think about it, in essence, the driver and the vehicle represent everything. The driver and the vehicle is the life. It is the life. The monopole and the design crystal have an extraordinary relationship to each other because monopoles embed themselves literally into the design crystal. If we could look into the schematic of this design crystal, we would see in essence that this form can fit into this crystal. The condition of the design crystal and the monopole being together in a bond together is how they exist before incarnation. And this is what happens at the moment of biological death as well. They come together again at death. The biological death is signaled by the design crystal traveling down the central channel, going down the channel 4323 and the 8-1, and going into the G center, aligning and bonding again with the magnetic monopole, then continuing the journey outward until it leaves the body. This is what takes place at death. There is a very special relationship that exists between this design crystal and the magnetic monopole. And this created a dilemma for the personality crystal. The dilemma of the personality is that it assumes it does things, that it is in charge of the life. It assumes that it is the driver. It assumes that it owns this vehicle and can do what it likes with the vehicle. In fact, the only true capacity that the personality passenger has is to just simply look out the window. So when we are looking at this configuration, what I really want you to deeply think about is this relationship that is there between the design crystal and the magnetic monopole. The moment that a human being comes into existence is the moment that the personality crystal enters into the vehicle, which happens at 88 degrees of the sun's movement before birth, or about 88 or 89 days before the actual birth. Now, according to almost all religious traditions, the soul, the so-called soul, which in human design we refer to as the personality crystal, is there at the moment of conception. This is one of the deepest fallacies about what it is to be a human being. It is the moment of the personality crystal enters the body that gives us our humanness. It is the personality crystal and its relationship with the vehicle, the quantum or holistic view of the combining of the personality crystal in the body with the design crystal and the magnetic monopole that gives us our human nature. There is no human nature before the point in which the personality crystal enters into the vehicle. As an example, when we think about stem cell research or first trimester abortions, and we look at the uproar that all of that causes because it is said to be murder and so on, and the potential cures that are possible through being able to work with stem cells that are going to be denied simply because you harvest an 18-hour-old stem cell, which you consider to be a human life. Obviously, this is a problem connected with religions and the way in which the homogenized not self looks at things. It is one of the great jokes to recognize that humanity does not know when they first become human and when life stops. In other words, there is an assumption that life begins with conception and ends with death. And yet we know the personality crystal arrives late in the vehicle and leads late after death as it lingers for up to 72 hours. That's Bardo studies if you want to go investigate that. So there is a deep misunderstanding that is, again, pointed directly at the central part of my theme right now, and that is this relationship between design crystal and the magnetic monopole. They are there before the personality crystal ever arrives. They build the vehicle, they build the fetus, they build a mechanism, they build a biomass, a very sophisticated biomass, but nonetheless, what they're building is a biomass. And it's only at the point when the personality crystal enters into the vehicle that the biomass takes on what is its transcended nature. That is when it becomes the potentiality of a human being, only then. What it says is how limited the involvement is of the personality crystal. When you understand the nature of the design crystal and its relationship to the magnetic monopole, and the building of the vehicle in the first 3 months from the point of conception, all of the potential of that being is created without any input from the personality crystal. It's not like the personality crystal is in any way an architect, nor is it in any way able to influence what is going on in terms of building the vehicle that is going to be delivered and the driver that is going to move it through its life. The personality crystal is very confused as it thinks that it is it. It is identified with being the life. It begins to be very deep and very terrible black humor as the personality crystal assumes that this mind is in charge of anything, that it assumes that it is in charge. It assumes that it can control the destiny of its life, that it assumes that it is the life when in fact it isn't. It's just the passenger to the life. Not only that, but the personality and the potential of the personality is limited by the refinement of the vehicle. If the vehicle does not produce a really good brain pan, then you're not going to have the advantages and full potential of the personality to reflect consciousness because it's going to be limited by the vehicle. And so when we are talking about the magnetic monopole, we begin to understand that the magnetic monopole transcends in so many ways the personality.